Good afternoon. You guys got to see today's star, and so I would appreciate it if you don't walk out before I finish talking. So what I thought I would do is try to walk you through how I think about the local economy. Is the mic on? Yeah, can you hear me? The theme of last year's presentation was this notion of revenge spending, right? And so we were cooped up for a couple of years. We really wanted to get out. We were booking vacations. We were traveling. We were eating at fancy restaurants. And the question that most economists have been struggling with is, how much runway is left? How much savings did these people accumulate? Where is this money coming from? And is there more to come, or has the party potentially ended? Right? So that's kind of going to be the theme of this. And we, Wilmingtonians, have benefited massively from the pandemic because we've gotten a significant influx of individuals that moved into the region. And that has implications for the labor market, it has implications for the housing market, and it has implications for things that we see on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to go broad. I'm going to talk a little bit about spending. I'm going to talk a little bit about the labor market. Then I'm going to move to housing. I'm really glad that Tom did not use slides, because this may be death by PowerPoint. I hope it's not, but let's see if I can keep your attention. But we need to get some things out of the way. This is Taylor Swift's economy, right? And so I think this is the new barometer of economic activity, or maybe Travis Kelce's, or when Bill Belichick comments on your relationship, I think you've made it, right? And so, but no, seriously, we are still spending at a rate that I don't think anybody would have expected. And I joke about Taylor Swift, but the reality is that the willingness to pay for experiences continues to surprise to the upside. I have a student, I teach an honor section of principles of microeconomics, and I have a student, I assign these op-eds. And I had the students come up to me and she said, I want to write about Taylor Swift. And I go, okay, what's the econ angle? She said, I want to convince Wilmington to give an economic incentive to Taylor Swift to come perform here. No longer give incentives to firms, let's give them to Taylor Swift. Hey, there is a huge economic impact. Federal Reserve of Philadelphia found that whenever she goes to perform, hotels sell out, restaurants do really well. So maybe, just maybe, I don't know. But we have our own version of Taylor Swift. I went to this website called Concert Archives, typed Wilmington, and it popped up 80 different concerts between May and September of this year. Now, if you're like me, rather than enjoy music, I go with my wife, and I sit down and I go, there are about 7,000 people here. They're paying $70 each. It's probably $500,000. Each person is having 2 beers at $20. That's another $150,000. That's a lot of money being injected into the economy. And it's true, right? And I'm contributing, I'm doing my part. So let me tell you what I'm about to tell you. To me, Wilmington is driven by two big things. Migration. There has been almost $1 billion that's been injected into the area as a result of migration. What do I mean by that? If you were to take the income of people that moved in and remove from it the income of people that have moved out, there is an additional $1 billion that's been injected into the area. That's a massive, massive number and explains a lot of the trends that I was just talking about. Visitation activity, whether you take occupancy tax or whether you take employments, have been through the roof. The question now is how much visibility do we have over the next 6 months, year? And the outlook is foggy. Tom touched on this a little bit. The notion of the excess savings that people have accumulated that's been debated to death is now in question, right? Have we run out of money? And if so, what are the potential implications for some of these sectors that have been doing extremely well over the last couple of years? The labor market has been holding really steady, but we're starting to see signs of cracks locally. I'll talk a little bit more about this. This is not a doom and gloom talk, but there seems to be a bifurcation across sectors, and we're starting to see weakness in some of them. The housing market is very confusing. right? And so we're basically in a standoff, right? And so we don't know, people don't want to sell homes because they don't know where to go. They're locked in at 2%. They would have to trade that for an 8% mortgage that's not super attractive. If you're a buyer, you're not super excited about buying at 8%. So we basically are in this standoff. But one of the surprising things is that locally, we're still making all-time highs when it comes to housing prices, even with all of this pressure, right? Something is going to have to give. And then inflation is moderating, as Tom mentioned, but so are wage gains. One of the things that you may or may not know is that wages, at least locally, have been outstripping inflation for the last year and a half, which means that while we're feeling the pinch of inflation, for a lot of people, especially those employed in sectors like leisure and hospitality, they've seen their wages grow at a faster clip than inflation. But now we're seeing inflation moderate, we're also seeing wage gains moderate. So, word association, in migration, absolutely robust. Labor market, resilient. Consumer, insatiable, right? And now, maybe we're satiated, but maybe we're going to start borrowing more in order to continue having those experiences. I don't know. But I think it's important to kind of try to have some visibility for the next couple of years. One of the conversations that I have quite often is, can we use the information from the last couple of years to extrapolate about what's going to happen locally? And I don't think that we can do that. I think the next couple of years locally are going to look a lot more like they did pre-pandemic, because again, we have this front row seat for a lot of spending, a lot of economic activity, a lot of that excess saving, and as that kind of makes its way out of the system, I don't think that we're going to have any sort of long decline, but I think that we're going to start experiencing a slower rate of growth than what we've experienced over the last couple of years. So I'm going to start with this map because this is, to me, like the big part of the story. This is showing you, so just to kind of give you an idea of the scale, the lighter colors show you faster growth. This is population growth by county in the state. Lighter colors, faster growth, and I'm just going to read for you the numbers that matter. Brunswick County added 12% in population between 2020 and 2022, and Pender County added 9%, we added 4%. If you were to add these three together, because now Brunswick County is back in the Wilmington Metro, we are, I'll give you a moment to clap, you can do it. So the Wilmington Metro is made up of the fastest growing county in the state, Brunswick, the third fastest growing county in the state, Pender, and the 14th fastest growing county in the state, New Hanover County. Again, this is a migration story. Now, why does that matter? Absent migration, all three counties would have actually shrunk. Tom hinted at this. Now, natural increase is just the difference between births and deaths. Had we not received this migration wave that I'm describing, all three counties would have actually been smaller, which means all of the population increase we're seeing is due to this migration. Now, this matters because, again, there are macroeconomic factors that potentially determine whether or not this wave of migration is going to potentially slow down. But for now, we are seeing the benefits of that, and those benefits are really interesting. Now, when I talk to people, I think most of you, if you were to guess, you would say, if we were to look at New Hanover County and I would ask you, where do you think most of the migrants to New Hanover County have come from? You would say, probably New York, right? Well, 2/3 of migrants to New Hanover County are coming from other counties in the state. 1/3 are coming from these states. The 4 states from which we're receiving most people are New York, Virginia, California, and South Carolina, right? But now, the reason I'm showing you this is because I want to show you something about the incomes of these people and the reason why migration to me is such a big part of this story. I'm just going to pull all of this up and explain to you what I'm showing you. So I'm going to focus on Brunswick just for a second. Brunswick County, again, take the income of people that have moved in, remove from it the income of the people that have moved out. So this is using IRS data between 2020 and 2021. Take the income of people who moved in, take out from it the income of people that have moved out. There's been an additional $500 million that has been injected into Brunswick County. Now, if you take that number and you divide it by the income of people who live in Brunswick County and didn't move out, you get that's 13%. So it's a 13% increase, essentially, in income in Brunswick County. And you can see the numbers for New Hanover and Pender. Interestingly enough, the migrants that moved to North Carolina from other states don't seem to reflect significant differences between the residents and the ones who've moved in. So what does this all mean? It just means we tend to be receiving people who are better off than the ones who are moving out. That, again, has implications for housing, has implications for making reservations at fancy restaurants, has implications for willingness to spend money. Now, if we add up those three numbers, that's basically $1 billion. I'm a regional economist, so I think about economic impact all the time. What's the economic impact of injecting $1 billion into an economy? That it's basically another $900 million that's being generated as a result of these spin-off effects, and something like 5,000 jobs that are created as a result of this additional spending. So again, the migration story to me is a big deal because it feeds into the labor market resilience that we've been talking about. And as I'm going to show you here in a second, it feeds into the spending story. So let's pivot to employment. We have, roughly speaking, about 10,000 more jobs than we did pre-pandemic. So if you were to take employment today, compare it to employment 2019, we have about 10,000 more jobs. Now, this is for the Wilmington Metro, excluding Brunswick. But what's interesting is that line that you see there is just the trend. We're basically right on trend to the growth that we were experiencing even before the pre-pandemic. We missed it during 2020 because of the shutdowns and because of COVID, and now we're basically right back on track. Now, what's interesting is this. We're seeing now a deceleration in growth at the local level. Just to be clear, what I'm showing you here is this is January 2023, for example, compared to January 2022, and it's telling you that there were 5.5% more jobs in January 2023 than there were in January 2022. February, there were fewer jobs than in January relative to the same month last year. In July, the last month for which we have complete data, we added basically 300 jobs relative to the year before, right? So there is this deceleration in growth that's happening. How is this deceleration happening? Well, there's now the haves and have-nots. Some of you may have insight on this because it's been breaking my brain. But as you can see there are two sectors that are in the red. So red is bad, green is good. The two sectors that are in the red are professional and business services. So what's professional and business services? Those are sectors that essentially, or firms that provide services for other companies. The range is super broad. So that goes from legal services or architectural services to something like janitorial services. Now, one of the things that I think is going on here is that part of this decline is driven by the PPD sale to Thermo Fisher. Because PPD is classified as a firm in professional services, and some of Thermo Fisher's activities are classified in manufacturing, and some are classified in healthcare. So we're starting to see a little bit of weakness in the economy. Not that we're going negative, but we're experiencing this slowdown in growth, and it seems to be concentrated thus far in professional and business services. And typically, it's a harbinger for what are firms doing, right? If I'm not feeling that great about the economy, I'm less likely to contract out services. And then leisure and hospitality is interesting because that's a sector that, again, is sensitive to consumer spending and potentially sensitive to this excess saving that we've accumulated or didn't. I'm sure you can't see any of this, but I'll tell you what it says. So green is good, pink is bad, not the colors. Actually, that's teal. I think I'm going to get fired, but teal is good, pink is bad. most sectors are still growing. So what you're looking at here, I'm going to pick, for example, on leisure and hospitality. It says in July of 2023, leisure and hospitality had 2.7% fewer jobs than it did in July of 2022. Now, every sector, with the exception of the two that I've mentioned, are still growing, but the rate of growth has started to slow down, which again, to me, if there is a theme, it's this notion of deceleration. Maybe the Fed's action nationally are starting to actually make a dent. Maybe we've exhausted those excess savings. Maybe we're making slightly different decisions, and that's starting to make its way into the labor market. Just quickly, not to belabor the point, this does not mean that the economy has entered a recession, because we still have 10% more jobs than we did pre-COVID. And for most of the last 3 years, we were outperforming the statewide economy. Now we're basically growing at the same rate relative to 2019. But this is what's interesting, is that if you look at the last month's numbers, so this is just growth in employment in July 2023 relative to July 2022, Wilmington had the slowest growth this past month. And I don't know how much of that is the sale of PPD to Thermo Fisher, how much of those jobs potentially have gone remotely, or if there is something structural that's potentially happening. That's a question. If any of you have insights, please talk to me afterwards. I've mentioned spending at the very beginning, and the numbers are just absolutely amazing. So this is room occupancy tax. This is potentially a really good measure for visitation. Room occupancy tax collections are 50-some% higher than they were, this is at the fiscal year, than they were in 2019. And the consumer is still doing reasonably well. Now, if you want to be a little bit of a doubter, you go, well, let me look at year-over-year numbers. The year-over-year numbers provide a little bit of insight as to maybe, again, these changes in consumption. We've experienced the first 2 straight months of decline year over year in April and May, where the numbers were weaker than the previous year. Now, you may look at that and go, whoa, that seems bad. Or you go, well, we're comparing numbers to 2022, and in 2022, we were in full revenge mode. And so maybe 22 numbers were just way too elevated, and now we're basically resetting. That's my explanation for these numbers, because 2022 numbers were just so explosive. And the same thing here. These are travel numbers that look at emplanements. Emplanements basically tell you about airport activity. That's growth relative to the previous year, incredibly strong. Delta just reported that they made $1.8 billion in profits, which is just remarkable, which means we're still traveling. Maybe we're making slightly different choices, but we're still traveling. We're still getting on planes. We're still booking hotels, but maybe the air is coming out of the party a little bit. I have to show you this because I'm going to advocate for a raise given that the dean is here. This is showing, if you know him, nudge him on your way out. I always do this, and I haven't gotten a raise yet. But what I'm showing you here, I think, is a really interesting way to look at the economy, because to me, it maybe explains why we've been doing so well. So the horizontal line is the US CPI. And what you see there are the growth rate in hourly wages by metro area. And so it's telling you that hourly wages in Wilmington grew by 7% between July 2022 and July 2023. This guy did not get 7%. And the CPI was 3.2%, which means that on average, workers in Wilmington are still experiencing wage increases that exceed the CPI. How in the world could that be? It's because of the composition of jobs that we have in the area, and we have a non-negligible share of jobs that are in sectors like leisure and hospitality that would experience in worker shortages, the bojangles that Tom mentioned, that had to raise wages in order to attract and retain workers, right? So to me, this is one of the other reasons. In addition to excess savings, the fact that workers in the area were still experiencing raises that exceeded CPI meant that people were continuing to spend, and that was helping bolster economic activity. This is making the exact same point. The green bar is the one that's really interesting because that's showing you wage increases or hourly wage increases in Wilmington. Then you're looking at North Carolina wage increases year over year, and then you're looking at the US CPI. Throughout the pandemic, hourly wage increases in Wilmington exceeded the CPI by a very healthy margin. In addition, we're now experiencing this decline in inflation, but also we're experiencing this decline in wage gains. So if wage gains start to drop and inflation persists, we may see a decline in purchasing power, but that's something to be seen. Now, the housing market, most of you know this. I find it incredibly puzzling. What you're looking at there are lines for New Hanover, Pender, and Brunswick relative to 2020. So it's an index relative to 2020. This is using the Zillow Housing Index. And the takeaway is the rate of growth has clearly slowed, right? But all three counties are still making all-time highs. So the median price in all three counties is still higher than it was in January 2020. Volume has clearly come down, and I said at the very beginning that we're in a standoff because we're basically in this fight where sellers are hesitant to sell, buyers are hesitant to buy, volume has come down, but it's clear that there is still an appetite for purchasing homes, and that's what's keeping prices elevated. So is it going to be buyers who are going to jump back in, depending, I guess, on what the Fed does, or are sellers going to be at a point where they're going to start adding inventory to the table? But what's important here is that this is not a regional story. This is the same index for every single county in the state. And what I'm showing you here is for our three-county region, we're basically on average around 50 to 60% higher than we were in January 2020. So prices are 50 to 60% higher in all three counties, but it's basically throughout the state, it's basically throughout the country, meaning that prices just have not come down as much as maybe the Fed would have hoped. I don't know how much they were hoping prices will come down, but it's a sector that we consider to be interest rate sensitive, and it really has not shown as much weakness, even though we know below the surface that there is something going on. There was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal recently that made an interesting point, and they said, maybe one of the reasons consumer spending is staying so strong is because people view housing now as so unaffordable that they're basically taking money that they would have put aside for a down payment and they're going to see Taylor Swift, maybe. I don't know. And this is just the year-over-year numbers. And the year-over-year numbers are just showing you that in most counties, we're still, so 63 out of the 100 counties in the state are still experiencing all-time high prices. I'll say a couple more things about the general economy. This is employment growth in Wilmington, the state, and the US economy. We've done very well relative to both the state and to the national economy. The forecasts that are available at the state level show that the economy is going to weaken a little bit, but there's still going to be positive growth at the state level. The forecasts that are available nationally vary quite a bit, but a lot of forecasters have egg on their faces, right? And so now, where will the Wilmington economy potentially go? By the best estimates, by the best data that we have, I think that we're going to see a weaker year of growth than we've seen the last 3 years. This does not mean that it's doom and gloom or that the sky is falling. I just think given that we're sensitive to consumer spending, to interest rates, there is a lot of evidence that says that the party potentially is coming to an end and that we're running out of runway when it comes to our experiences. But maybe we should fuel economic activity by giving that economic incentive to Taylor Swift. Let me just say two more things, and I promise I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to just make a broader point. I know a lot of you are thinking about migration. A lot of you are thinking about the labor force. The thing that I've found fascinating over the last couple of years is the state has been growing really fast, but the growth has been massively uneven. There are a lot of rural areas across the state that are falling behind because the growth has been concentrated on the coast and in some centers that are booming. But there is massive variation across the state when it comes to growth. And then the second theme is that the state is getting older, and that has significant challenges for economic development and economic growth. I'm going to show you one last graph. I promise it's the last one. Median age in Brunswick County now is 57 years old. It's the oldest county in the state, and it's getting older really, really fast, largely as a result of the migration. Now, that poses some big questions about, again, these decisions that we're going to have to make in terms of economic development, in terms of recruitment, in terms of retention. And that needs to be part of both the short-term and long-term strategy. We've benefited massively from some of these tailwinds nationally, but I think that taking demographics into account, I'm not saying that demographic is destiny, but we need to take it into account when thinking about the next decade. Last couple of things. A lot of questions. You have one of the smartest people here to answer them. So I'm going to stop talking. If I said something idiotic and you want to yell at me, please email me. But genuinely, thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you.